All right. Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of The Real Thomas Jefferson. The aim of this show is to get better acquainted with Thomas Jefferson as a philosopher and moralist, empiricist philosopher, and through those, perhaps to get better acquainted with ourselves. For an exchange with a noteworthy moralist will likely be beneficial for those who aspire towards moral betterment. I am your host, George Gorey, formerly a captain from the California Highway Patrol, currently a criminal investigator with a local district attorney's office in the San Francisco Bay Area. Dr. Holochuk is a professor of philosophy and history who taught at institutions such as the University of Pittsburgh, University of Michigan, and Rutgers University, Camden. He is author, editor of over 70 books and nearly 400 published essays, formal and informal, on topics such as ethics, ancient philosophy, science, psychoanalysis, and critical thinking. His current research is on Thomas Jefferson. He is acknowledged by many scholars to be the world's foremost authority and has published over 300 essays, formal and informal, and has 30 books on Thomas Jefferson. He also writes about Ukraine. Today, we discuss Jefferson's thoughts on agrarianism as a Republican ideal. Good afternoon, where you're at, Colonel.
Yeah, I got that. You got a big lava lamp in back of you, so I see.
I decided to
It's
travel to Alaska.
all these. Okay, I'm in the Ukrainian countryside. You see the women, Ukrainian women are very hardy. They're doing all the work, with the exception of one fellow over there. He seems to be a guy there. Maybe it's a female. Who knows? Anyways, yeah. So you're doing well, I guess. I mean,
I
I've got
am.
three books coming out. I've got two on Thomas, one on philosophical conversations between Jefferson and John Adams. That's coming out shortly. Um, and then one on the Declaration of. I should ask you. I told you I'd dedicate the book on the Jefferson and Adams to you. Would you prefer the Declaration or Adams? Let's throw that out.
I
Which
prefer
one?
the Declaration. The
All right,
Declaration,
I'll
yeah.
do the Declaration. I'll have to find out someone for John Adams and stuff. Anyway, so we're going to do something a little different today. We're going to go to screen share and bring up some slides and on Jefferson the agrarian and talk about them. So let's do that. Here we have Query 19. I'm going to go to the next one. Here we have Query 19. You want to read this for us, please?
The political economists of Europe have established it as a principle that every state should endeavor to manufacture for itself. And this principle, like many others we transfer to America, without calculating the difference of circumstance, which should often produce a difference of result. In Europe, the lands are either cultivated or locked up against the cultivator. Manufacture must therefore be resorted to of necessity, not of choice, to support the surplus of their people. But we have an immensity of land according the industry of the husbandman. It is best then that all our citizens should be employed in its improvement, or that one half should be called off from that to exercise manufactures and handicraft arts for the other? Question mark.
So he sets this up as a question and he wants to answer that. And his answer is going to be all our citizens should be employed in its improvement. At least when he writes this. Later on, he'll change his mind. But he starts off with this principle: every state should endeavor to manufacture for itself. This is a principle of self-sufficiency, right? And there's a difference of circumstance, which often produces a difference of result. And he contrasts Europe. He's talking about land is either cultivated, it's farmed, or it's locked up against the farmer. And he's thinking of when he's in France, he's thinking of these massive estates by the gentry, by the wealthy French, where they have acres and acres and acres of, say, forested land that they leave uncultivated, where peasant people could have a small plot of land and farm it. And they are prohibited from doing that because these people own the land, use it for fox hunting and things like that, for gaming, bird shooting, and stuff. So, but in the United States at the time, in America, we have all sorts of land. We have it, and we're thinking of even moving all the way to the Pacific. So there's this question, we have. So he's contrasting here. You have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think that obviously he thinks that the life of the husbandman and farmer is better than the way the aristocrats of France live, or the as he called it, the large heaps of big cities, right? I mean, big cities are throwing people together in manufacture where there's a lot of competition, whereas the farmer has this virtuous life, um, a
Well, you
life where
live
he
in
can.
San Francisco, is that right? Right
I live in
around?
the San Francisco Bay Area, packed with people, packed with traffic and cars, very little land here. And I would happen to agree with Jefferson. There's much less virtue in an area like this. And
Okay,
I think that's what he's looking at.
we'll go on. I want you to hold that thought and expand on. I'll read the next slide. Sequi natura, Latin means follow nature. This is a very Stoic principle. Those who labor in the earth are the chosen people of God, if ever he had a chosen people, whose breasts he has made his peculiar deposit for substantial and genuine virtue. It is the focus in which he keeps alive that sacred fire, which otherwise might escape from the face of the earth. Corruption of morals in the mass of cultivators is a phenomenon of which no age nor nation has furnished an example. It's a mark set on those who are not looking up to heaven, to their own soil and industry, as does the husbandmen for their subsistence, depend for it on casualties and caprice of customers. Dependence begets subservience, and venality suffocates the germ of virtue and prepares fit tools for designs of ambition. What do you think of this?
I think that's his philosophy in a nutshell, right there, that the life of the husbandman, the farmer, is virtuous because he's in the soil, he's building something, he's making something, he's growing something useful. He's, I don't want to say living a life of leisure because farming is hard work, but
Oh, no.
that he's creating this virtuous life for him and his family, and giving back something, whereas competing and using the caprice of customers and constantly making things and selling things to people they don't necessarily need, is destroying their morals through this, I guess, desire for making money. That's how I read that.
And people need food. You can't
Yes.
live without food. So it's just a very healthy. And then, he's getting his, I use this metaphor when I talk about writing history. I like to tell people that writing good history is getting your fingers into the dirt, getting your fingers dirty, talking about details, giving examples, doing the hard work instead of just talking about Jefferson's lust for Sally Hemings, which is easy enough to do and it's boring as hell. Let's talk about Jefferson and the natural bridge. Let's talk about Jefferson as a farmer. What crops did he farm? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that makes you go, for example, into his memorandum books. And you've got to just search for material and see, what he said about X, Y, and Z. So, I mean, he says elsewhere that farming is cornucopia. And in a sense, that's true. And in one sense, it's not. In other words, you put a few seeds in the ground, look what you get. I've got, see, viewers can see that. I have got a orange seed, a grapefruit seed, actually. And I have in my house from putting 2 seeds in the earth last year, last spring, I have 2 trees that are already about 3 feet tall. They're orange trees. They're just over a year old. So astonished, my lime tree doesn't grow very fast, but these orange trees are growing. In some sense, I put 1 seed in the ground, give it the soil some attention and water, some sun, and I've got trees that are giving me oranges, that will be giving me oranges. So it's very cornucopian. One thing he doesn't talk about, it makes it sound like everything goes so swimmingly and beautifully for the farmer, for the husband.
Right. Yeah.
What sort of things does he? And he knows this too from his own experience. You need water, and you don't need too much water. You need sunshine, and you don't want too much sunshine. You don't want drought. He wasn't a very successful farmer. He even admitted late in life, when his grandson took over his affairs, he was a really bad farmer. He used to farm for books, like he did with everything.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And also being away from home didn't help either all the time.
I didn't help at all, but he was a politician. Right? He devoted his life. He couldn't oversee his farm. I don't think he would have been happy as a farmer. He says at one point when he retired from the Secretary of Statehood that he was real happy. He says, if anybody wrote letters, if you come to visit me, you're going to talk farming. That's it. We're not going to talk about politics. I don't think he would have been happy as a farmer. He just was so interested in all facets of things in the world that to focus on farming would have been, politics gave him, in my estimation, I don't know if you agree with this, a greater arena in which he could express his talents. His,
Oh, absolutely.
well,
I think he would have been wasting his talents if he just remained a farmer, sowing his peas and corn and, you know, all that other stuff and raising livestock. I think he would have been wasting his talents. And I think there's part of him that probably knew that as well.
he loved his peas. Here's a,
He
uh,
did.
this looks like what, kale or something, or
It does
maybe
look like kale
broccoli.
or
There's
broccoli,
lettuce.
possibly.
I don't, he loved his peas. He had so many different types of peas that go. And this one's for you to read. This is from
The
one of his
cultivators of the earth are the most virtuous citizens and possess most of the amor patri, um,
patriae. Patriae.
patriae, love of country. Merchants are the least virtuous and possess the least of the amor patri. The latter reside principally in the seaport towns, the former in the interior country.
Well, who's from the seaport towns? John Adams, right?
And all the
And
Federalists.
yeah. Um, any thoughts on this? Merchants are,
Yeah, I
why
think
does
he
he think
thinks that,
merchants are the least virtuous?
I mean, I think it's kind of like he had really alluded to before, because they're constantly in competition. They're drawing their gains from what they sell to people, much of the time selling things to people that people don't need. And they're in this competition. And although our modern society tells us competition in a capital environment is healthy, and there's probably some truth to that, I think he saw it as not being able to cultivate the finer things in life, such as education, such as bettering yourself, such as like farming would do. Farming is bringing you close to the soil, close to the earth, close to the people, your neighbors. And I think he saw merchants as more of a chaotic life that I think would make some of them more loyal to the gains of the money they made than it would be to their own country.
Yeah, it's not as chaotic. The as you mentioned, the life of the farmer. I suppose that there is some sort of competition between, say, if I'm growing tobacco and so is my neighbor, I want to make sure my tobacco is better than yours. When it goes to market, I can get more money, a better price for it. But
Right.
nonetheless, all things considered, there's probably a complementarity to being a farmer. In other words, I want to do well, but I also want my neighbor to do well. And we're both in it for the same reason, and to feed people. And if both of us could have a good crop, um, that presumably in most instances will benefit everybody, right?
And although he doesn't say it here, I think one of the things he also recognized, I mean, you have the British East India Company, the Dutch East India Company, many of these corporations that were wealthy corporations chartered by the government, which were merchants, they became tyrannical. Like the British East India Company conquered India. They sold tea at a monopoly. And so you look at that kind of a life, and I think he saw that as extremely unvirtuous.
Yeah, but they did give us IPAs,
That they did.
Indian Pale
So
Ales. I'm
there's some good to that.
extraordinarily fond of a good, somewhat moderately bitter. I like the West Coast IPAs the best with the floral
Oh, yeah, they're
hops,
good.
super bitter, especially the double IPA. So there's a small bright side to the whole thing. All right, this one I guess is from Jefferson's algorithm. Jefferson was fond of phrasing things algorithmically in sort of like an equation form or something. This, the natural progress and consequence of the arts, has sometimes perhaps been retarded by accidental circumstances, but generally speaking, here's our algorithm. The proportion which the aggregate of the other class of citizens bears in any state to that of its husbandmen is the proportion of its unsound to its healthy parts, and is a good enough barometer whereby to measure its degree of corruption. In effect, he's saying if the number of farmers is in a one-to-one distribution to manufacturers, it's not really such a healthy society. But if we have like a 9 or 10-to-1 distribution of farmers to merchants, we can say, roughly, generally speaking, this is going to be a virtuous society. And it goes
That's
back to,
exactly how I read that.
yeah. This is generally speaking because these sort of algorithmic or mathematical these statements of proportion stuff um, always have limits, right? If I had every single person farming and no one doing any sort of manufacture in the country, this would be taking things a little bit too much. So, but this is Jefferson's tendency to put everything's in algorithmic form and express he wants the United States to be a nation of farmers, principally a nation of farmers, and only manufacture uh, in terms of the things you need. All right, the next one is yours, right? Did we do this one?
Yes.
We did.
Yes, we did that one.
Back. Okay.
Here we go. While we have land to labor then, let us never wish to see our citizens occupied at a workbench or twirling a distaff. Carpenters, masons, smiths are wanting in husbandry, but for the general operations of manufacture, let our workshops remain in Europe. It is better to carry provisions and materials to workmen there than bring them to the provisions and materials, and with them their manners and principles. The loss by the transportation of commodities across the Atlantic will be made up in happiness and permanence of government.
Yeah, if we adopt their manufacturing sort of frame of mind, he says, you know, we also adopt their manners and principles. And what's going on in Europe all the time, there's always a war between France and England. And that he finds disturbing. And you think about what a farmer owns a plot of land and he works that land. He's making sure it's manured if he has money for manuring or if he has enough manure, and he's got to care for the land. A manufacturer, look at manufacturing plants. Flint, I live in Flint, and the Flint River has been noted for being extraordinarily unhealthy because of a lot of the factories and would dump all sorts of chemicals and anything in the river just to get them out of the way. Save a lot of money that way by not disposing of them properly. So he says this elsewhere, manufacturers can sometimes be very abusive to the land. They don't have an attraction to the land, right? They don't care about the land because they're producing stuff in, say, a small factory or whatever. And the idea is to get the goods produced, and it doesn't matter where you do that part, because if this plot of land doesn't work, I can move it elsewhere.
Yes, and I think that he sees, like, he says, I think it's later on in life, I don't remember the exact quote. He calls the nations of Europe, nations of eternal war. And like you said, France and England always at war, and there's all these alliances. There's the Russians, there's the French, there's the Spanish, and he sees all these countries as basically corrupted by feudalism, monarchy, and manufacturing through monopolies. And so I think that his view is he doesn't want to bring that to America. This is a pristine continent, right, with farmers and husbandmen and some manufacturing, but a moral nation, something new in the history of the world compared
Yeah,
to
this is something
Europeans.
new, right? Let's talk about
Yeah.
this. This is a utopian element, something new.
Absolutely.
Let's be a nation of farmers, right? And as farmers, we're interested in caring for our own farm and making sure, having well wishes for our neighbors who are farmers. We don't embroil ourselves in the affairs of Europe and the wars of Europe, and by wanting their manufactured goods, by importing their goods and exporting other manufactured goods to them, while they're importing to us, we get involved in their politics, their warfare. It's utopianism. And Jefferson was,
Yes.
in the book, you have my book on Jefferson's political philosophy. It's called Jefferson's Political Philosophy and the Metaphysics of Utopia.
Utopia.
Because he was a utopist. I really believe that. He was thinking of a nation of farmers. You talk about the America First policy, this what he was really arguing for, what Trump is trying to say, but Trump's policy can't work because the global network, there's too much economic interaction between nations today. You can't be isolated. But in Jefferson's day, you probably could. America could.
Oh,
America
yes, absolutely. There wasn't the instantaneous communication, 24-hour news cycles, instant looking at your profits, your stock market trades. That didn't exist then. It took months to get a communication, right? So
Yeah.
it was easier to be more utopian then, and fulfill that dream. And I think when you look at his dream of even though it might be utopian and people think unrealistic, I think the morality of it, of having a nation of farmers, it makes more sense, even if it's not entirely possible.
right, and it's sort of a Quaker model here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very much so. He had great respect for the Quakers. The only thing I think he would have said against them in some sense is that they're not, they educate themselves only so far as they need to educate themselves for farming. Jefferson would never have been happy with that. Jefferson always had to learn more. He had to know God's mind. But I mean, in the book that I have, if you look in there, I give some instances of other thinkers like Bacon, um, Moore,
Yes, sir.
Condorcet, and Mercier. Mercier wrote a book the year 24. Um, what was it? 2440 or
Or
something like
40.
that. Land,
Yeah.
and we'll have to talk about this at some point. It's a projection into the future of an ideal, beautiful society of Paris. Jefferson drew from this work. I don't know if he drew from this work so much, it's not quite to say. If you ever read the damn book, and I've read it several times, it's almost a mirror of everything Jefferson says is captured in that book about what, we're going to be a nation of farm. Everything in that book is captures Jefferson's sentiments on what a perfect society ought to be like. So I don't think Jefferson stole his views from there, but I think that they just happen to parallel each other quite neatly. It's a
Would you
really,
consider James Harrington's Commonwealth also of Oceania?
yeah. I talk
Also,
about that. I talk about
yeah,
that as well. He's certainly drawing from that. Adams draws from that a lot for his own political thinking stuff. Oceania was a very, very widely read book. Um, Here's his anti-city. I think this is on you, right?
yeah. The mobs of great cities add just so much to the support of pure government as soars do to the strength of the human body. It is the manners and spirit of a people which preserve a republican vigor. A degeneracy in these is a canker which soon eats to the heart of its laws and constitution. I would
He
have to
hated
agree with
cities.
much of that.
When Jefferson proposed in several letters, he proposed his own. There's a Jefferson or Jeffersonville, Indiana, and a couple other
Mhm.
places. He actually proposed a checkerboard square for cities, where you'd have a square, and on every side of the square you'd have housing, and then the square next to it, imagine a black square, and then the square, the white one, would be open. Then there'd be a square next to that, which would be, so every square, every other square is going to be open. That way he hated because, the plague was going on at the time, yellow fever, before,
Right.
and that's when they came out with the inoculation of it. But I mean, so Jefferson, when he designed his University of Virginia and everything, he designs everything with max. Notice how the Virginia is like is a U turned over on its back,
Yeah.
or
Yes.
in Greek, the letter P. We say pi, but the Greeks call it P. Um, it's like a P-shaped thing, and that was for ventilation, so people wouldn't get sick and wouldn't capture diseases and so forth. And so he comes up with this idea, and actually there are a few cities that started off that way, and they stopped real fast because we're wasting 50% of our land by with this open space that we could use it for building. And but if you look at some of the grids, I have to drive through those cities one of these days and stuff. It's really kind of cool. All right, I think we have. Go ahead.
I think it's a good point that he makes here that, I mean, I work in a big city, I've worked in many, and although they can have a great flair and spirit to them. I mean, let's be honest, putting human beings and cramming them into a small geographic area, which most cities are, it does breed a lot of crime and violence and dysfunction. So it makes sense that he would think this way. And I think that it doesn't mean that cities are terrible, that we should never have them. But when you look at many of the overpopulated cities in the world, they all have a lot of problems.
Well, not Jefferson, Aristotle really thought that you couldn't have that a city could only be a certain size, and roughly speaking, maybe nothing more than 200,000 or something. I don't know what he put on it, but I mean, it can't be too large, because if too large, you have problems. It's not self-sufficient anymore. You run into all sorts of problems. And
Becomes
uh,
unmanageable.
Montesquieu said the same thing. He was drawing from, contemporary of Jefferson. He was drawing from Aristotle. He says, yeah, cities can only be so large. Look at New York City. Look at your city. You have all sorts of crime and problems when things get too large. It's unmanageable. So
It is.
let's see. I did this one already. You can read this one, and then I'll do a
This is a
little
good one.
Plato after this.
Oh, I know no condition happier than that of a Virginia farmer might be conducting himself as he did during the war. His estate supplies a good table, clothes itself and his family with their ordinary apparel, furnishes a small surplus to buy salt, sugar, coffee, and little finery for his wife and daughters, enables him to receive and to visit his friends, and furnishes him pleasing and healthy occupation. So to secure all this, he needs but one act of self denial to put off buying anything till he has the money to pay for it.
Yeah, self-sufficiency right here. Again, we talked of this before going on that did Jefferson literally act according to his own principle here? Probably not. He bought a lot of books,
No.
and but he had, that was his passion, books. He had to have books, and um, but he owned a lot of land. And as I said, even though he was in massive debt, like today, be something like $1 million in debt when he died, he owned a lot of land, and in his day, property meant wealth and status. It wasn't measured by how much money you had per se. It was measured by um, how much property you owned. Literally, property, your house, and then the land on which you lived and stuff. So that was a measure of your wealth. But
Is
here
this
he's
comment
talking.
not? Oh, go ahead.
You go ahead. I don't have
No, I
to.
was just going to say, is this comment not indicative of him thinking about the ordinary farmer, the ordinary American, in the sense that although he was a wealthy aristocratic person and did overspend and had these issues with debt, when you look at the way he's looking at regular people, he's saying this is the good life for a regular person, right? This
And
type
for
of a
him, I
simple
mean,
life, and for
his
him.
his popular forest. I'm going to close the share off. His popular forest was really his ideal life. You have a very simple house, not large, on a plantation, and you're self-sufficient. Monticello was, as I've argued before, sort of it became a museum for him to tell the story of the American nation. And he had built it, I think, for his wife. And when his wife died, that's when he turned it over into making it into a sort of shrine for her, perhaps, or a museum telling the story of the American nation. But you talk about self-sufficient. I want to read something from Plato. Plato's Republic, and Jefferson always hated Plato's Republic. He says, I don't really think so. He's talking about, it's Socrates talking, this is book 2 of the books, 10 books. He's talking about a polis, a city state. And he says, Socrates asks Adeimantus, why do we have cities? Um, and Adeimantus says, I think a city comes to be because none of us is self-sufficient, but we all need many things. Do you think that a city is founded at any other principle? That's Socrates talking, excuse me. Adeimantus says, no, people need many things. Now, if you were to start a city, right, imagine you and your offspring, scions of Captain George Gorey, going to start their own city. They're going to get out of San Francisco proper, start their own city. How do you start a city? What do you need?
You need you need manpower, you need land, you need.
But what do you need first? I mean, think about starting your own city. Yeah, you just pull out, you have nothing, and pick out a pot of land and say, we're going to build a city over there. What do you
Well, you
start
need
with?
people. You need people.
You got the people. Say you got, a small
You're
number
going to
of
need
people,
material. You're going to need the materials to build the city, the
such
property.
as,
Well, in modern times, concrete, asphalt. You're going to need people
we'll go
that
in Jefferson's day. We need wood. We need to
wood,
build houses, right? What else?
homes, brick for
Something even
chimneys. You're going to need.
before you need houses. What else do you need? You can't really build a house until you.
You're going to need to transport all this stuff there. You're going to need money to be able to purchase this stuff, transport it there.
Before
Let's say
any of
it's
that, what do
man,
you need? What's the most important thing you need? Right off the bat, food,
people. Oh, and
food,
food. Yeah,
food
food,
and
of course.
water. I
A
mean,
lot for
because
the
you're not
people.
going to get any building done if you're not if you don't eat. So you need people who grow crops or kill animals, whatever they do. You need shelter, you need clothing, and things like that. So Socrates starts talking about to Adeimantus what he calls the Kallipolis, the literally translated to be the beautiful city, which would probably be better understood for us to be the ideal city. Kalos, kala is Greek for beautiful, but it means other things as well. So I think he's talking about the ideal city, and he's talking about right. We're going to need more than 4 citizens to provide the things we've mentioned, for a farmer won't make his own plow, not if he's a good one, nor his hoe, nor any of the other farming tools. Neither will a builder. He too needs lots of things. Carpenters, metal workers, many other craftsmen of sort will have to share our little city and make it bigger. We need cowherds, sheepherds, other herdsmen, cows to do the plowing and things like that. We need weavers and cobblers, right? And then we'll have to import certain things here, right? And then Socrates talks of living this great life. He says, well, we'll produce bread, wine, clothes, shoes, won't they? The Greeks drank wine all the time, a lot of times diluted with water. It wasn't that they're getting drunk all the time, but it's just, we talked about this even in Jefferson's day. Wine was a safer alternative to water. Jefferson had diarrhea all of his life because drinking water. There's a lot of stuff in water. He says they'll build houses, work naked and barefoot in the summer, and wear clothing and shoes in the winter. For food, they'll knead and cook the flour and meal they've made from wheat and barley. They'll put their honest cakes and loaves on reeds or clean leaves, and reclining on beds strewn with yew or myrtle, they'll feast with their children, drink their wine, and crowned with wreaths, sing hymns to the gods. They'll enjoy sex with one another, but bear no more children than their resources will allow, lest they fall into either poverty. So he's talking about this, and Glaucon, Plato's brother, I think, says, my goodness, where are the delicacies? And Socrates, oh, I got you. He goes, I was forgetting. It says, we'll need salt, olives, cheese, boiled roots, vegetables of the sort they cook in the country. There'll be desserts, figs, chickpeas, beans. They'll roast myrtle and acorns before the fire, peace and good health. When they die at a ripe old age, they'll bequeath a similar life to their children. And then Glaucon sort of explodes, and he says, if you were founding a city for pigs, Socrates, wouldn't you fatten them on the same diet? And Socrates sort of like, oh boy, he wants more things. So and he says, oh, you don't want a Kallipolis, you want a city that has a fever. And he says, let's study a city with a fever if that's what you want. We're going to need hunters, artists, imitators, poets, their assistants, actors, choral dancers, contractors, makers of all kinds of devices, right? We need more servants. We'll need tutors, nurses, wet nurses, nannies, beauticians, barbers, chefs, cooks, swineherds, right? And Socrates and Glaucon is saying, now we're getting somewhere, and so forth. And then, we can't manufacture everything by ourselves, so we're going to have to take from our neighbors, and they're going to want to take from us. And then Socrates says, I think we've just figured out where war comes from.
Wanting the cause of war.
And this is where Jefferson's going, isn't it? With this,
absolutely, he is headed that direction. That's what he's trying to say.
Yeah, it's he's got Plato in mind. I'm convinced when he's writing on this, that let's just we make the things that we need. We eat simple foods, and then when we have this feverish city, we're going to need a lot of doctors. And the other city, we really didn't need any, because I'm not overindulging. But now that I overindulge and I'm sick all the time, I drink too much wine, drinking ouzo, whatever Greeks do today.
Exactly, drinking ouzo.
Yeah, and getting sick all the time. We're going to need a lot of doctors because we're not living simply. So I think this is what Jefferson has in mind. He's sort of city building, and it's a sort of utopian argument. His agrarianism. First paper I ever published on Jefferson was on Jefferson's moral agrarianism. It was a solid paper. It was my first paper. I had one other professor say, well, it was nothing great. I said, yeah, you're right, but it's my first foray. Got published, and I still like it. It has its defects. But anyway, you have any parting thoughts on this? I mean,
I was going to say that, like, when you were talking about, and you wrote your book on his the metaphysics of utopia, he is a utopian of a sort, not in the sort of the modern utopians that will do anything to create utopia, like Pol Pot or these other lunatics that murdered half their populations in the name of utopia. His idea of a utopia is right down to the farmer, to the individual, to get them involved in their own life and their own decisions, kind of like we've discussed on other shows when he talks about the wards, to getting involved in you creating your own republic of peace and plenty, um, and freedom. And I think that he envisioned that for the whole world. And
so
he
when
hoped for that for the whole
when
world.
we talk about in the Declaration, he talks about life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Given everything we say there, what does he mean by pursuit? And he's often translated to mean, and I say this myself, each person ought to decide for himself what he's going to make of himself, what he's going to do in his life. Can we take that to be an absolute relativists where they can do anything they want to do?
No, because I think he saw happiness as surrounded by the bounds of morality. You couldn't be happy if you were immoral or corrupt.
Good answer, Captain. You're starting to put all the pieces together. That's right. So he talks about pursuit of happiness, and he leaves it sort of open-ended that, yeah, well, I can do whatever I want to do, but there's certain things I can do that are going to make me miserable, right? I can
Right.
peddle drugs, right? I can go to the horse races every day, go to cockfights, and get into debt and all things, but I'm not going to be a productive member of society. He's very, very much a Platonist in this, right? Plato was adopted something we call communitarianism, which is the polis itself is a larger, more important thing. It's axiology is just the science of worth. The polis is axiologically privileged. It is the thing that is more important than the group of people that comprise it. We think that view is false today. We think that it's, liberalism is just that the people are important, and that's Jefferson's view to some extent. But Jefferson buys into communitarianism in some sense, but also in the value of the individual people in the city at the same time.
Exactly.
Right? So
That's what makes his philosophy different, I think.
yeah. So he's not, when he talks about pursuit of happiness, he says you can really do anything you want, but if you're not doing something to contribute to the betterment of your community, you're going to be miserable. You're going to make the community worse than it needs to be, and you're
And
going
it's
to
not
be.
moral.
It's not, well, the same thing for him would be moral is just not working for the betterment, the well-being of your city or the well-being of yourself, right? Um,
Absolutely.
so what are we doing next week?
Next week we're gonna do something a little different. The Colonel and I will be replying to questions and comments from our prior show.
So we're going to be looking at the published videos and scouring for comments and the more interesting or important ones, or even the more difficult ones, and try to come up with answers. So that's it.
Yes.
All right, my man.
Well, thank you, Colonel. Have a happy Thanksgiving. And TTFN, I'm sure I'll be in touch with you long before then.
We sure will. You have a great one too.
Thank
And
you, sir.
thank you to all our viewers. Please like and share if you would, please. And add
Thank you.
comments to the bottom of the videos.
Please do.
Yep. Bye.